The most terrifying betrayal isn't when your enemy lies to you, it's when your childhood best friend suddenly realizes she never knew you at all.
Trump administration, but this is a woman who drops truth bomb.
For 31 years, Ninaki Priddy believed she knew Meghan Markle better than anyone else alive. Not the public version, not the polished Duchess, not the carefully curated humanitarian image the world was fed. No, she knew the girl behind the mask. The girl who giggled at sleepovers, who shared secrets and whispered midnight confessions, who stood beside her in childhood innocence before power, fame, and something far darker rewrote her story. But here's the part no one was ready to hear. Ninaki wasn't just Meghan's friend. She was her mirror, her witness. Her keeper of truths Meghan never expected would survive her transformation. Because according to Ninaki, the Meghan the world celebrates today isn't the Meghan she grew up with. It's someone else entirely. And the most chilling part, the change didn't happen overnight. It was slow, surgical, calculated. It began in a tiny kindergarten classroom in Hollywood. Two little girls, too young to understand ambition, too innocent to recognize manipulation. They shared snacks, shared toys, shared dreams. They became inseparable. Families intertwined, holidays together, sleepovers that lasted entire weekends.
Ninaki Priddy is actually the exception in the Disposable Friends series for Meghan Markle. She's a little bit different. She actually wasn't ghosted or rejected by Meghan Markle. It was more that she ended the friendship. And she ended the friendship prior to Meghan Markle meeting Prince Harry.
Ninaki didn't just visit Meghan's house, she lived inside her world. She saw everything. She saw the tension between Meghan's parents. She saw the emotional fractures forming inside a child forced to navigate adult chaos. She saw Meghan becoming the messenger between two warring households, carrying emotional weight far heavier than any child should ever carry. And that's where something inside Meghan began to form. Something quiet, something sharp, something watching. Even then, there were signs. Tiny signals Ninaki didn't understand at the time, but later, looking back, they screamed with eerie clarity. Meghan learned early how to adapt, how to shift, how to survive emotional environments by becoming whatever version of herself the moment demanded. With her mother, she was disciplined. With her father, she was adored. She understood power dynamics before she understood algebra. She learned which relationships served her and which didn't, and the ones that didn't, they faded. But back then, Ninaki never questioned it. She trusted her, loved her, protected her through elementary school, through high school, through those awkward teenage years where insecurities bloom and identities are fragile. Ninaki's family even took Meghan on a European vacation. Paris, London, Buckingham Palace. Two teenage girls laughing in front of royal gates, neither of them realizing that one day only one of them would make it inside. But here's where things start to fracture. Because while Meghan would later claim she knew nothing about royalty, Ninaki remembered something different.
Six got her first taste of the UK while traveling through Europe with her best friend's family, checking out the sights in Brussels.
It's the oddest thing I've ever seen.
And leaving her mark in Switzerland.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that says star to be. Kind of.
That moment alone cracked the foundation of Meghan's carefully crafted innocence narrative. Because according to Ninaki, Meghan wasn't naive. She was aware, focused, watching, planning. And then came Trevor.
She'd always had an interest in the royal family.
The chances of meeting the Queen are pretty slim.
Oh, the irony. That's a 15-year-old Meghan Markle on a bus tour in London in 1996.
Trevor Ingleson wasn't just Meghan's boyfriend. He became part of their inner circle. Ninaki watched their love story unfold from the front row. She saw the excitement, the promises, the vows whispered in confidence. She stood beside Meghan as her maid of honor when Meghan married him in Jamaica. She believed it was forever. But forever apparently had an expiration date because something changed when Meghan stepped into fame. And fame didn't just elevate Meghan, it replaced her. It started with small things, declined invitations, missed lunches, excuses that sounded reasonable at first. I might be recognized. That was the justification. That was the beginning of distance, not physical distance, emotional distance. Suddenly, Meghan wasn't accessible anymore. Not emotionally, not personally, not honestly. She became orbit instead of gravity. Friends no longer walked beside her, they circled her. And with that shift came something colder, entitlement. According to Ninaki, Meghan's time became more valuable than anyone else's. Her schedule mattered more. anymore. Presence became something others were expected to accommodate. If Meghan was in town, you dropped everything. If you didn't, she questioned your loyalty. Why don't you want to see me? But the real question was never spoken out loud. Why didn't she want to see them anymore? Because deep down, Ninaki felt it. She felt herself becoming less necessary, less important, less useful. And Meghan, she didn't apologize. She never apologized. Ninaki remembered a moment from childhood that suddenly felt less innocent and more prophetic. They were 7 years old, sitting in a garden. Meghan didn't want to play. They sat in silence for 2 hours, neither speaking. Ninaki was the one who eventually apologized. She always was, even when she wasn't wrong, even when Meghan created the silence. And now, decades later, the pattern returned. Only this time, the silence wasn't temporary. It was permanent. But the moment that truly shattered Ninaki's illusion wasn't about fame. It was about a dog, a small puppy named Bogart. The puppy had already been promised to another family, but Meghan wanted it. And according to Ninaki, Meghan didn't simply accept no. She applied pressure, used influence, leveraged her growing power to change the outcome. Not because she needed the dog, because she wanted the dog. And she was used to getting what she wanted. That moment shook Ninaki deeply, not because of the dog itself, but because of what it represented. It showed her a version of Meghan she didn't recognize, a version who didn't hesitate to override others, a version who prioritized desire over fairness, a version who no longer operated within the emotional framework of mutual respect. And that's when Ninaki realized something devastating. Her best friend wasn't becoming someone new. She was revealing who she had always been. And then came the divorce. Trevor didn't just lose a wife, he lost her completely. The rings weren't returned in person, they were mailed, registered post. Cold, clinical, final. No closure, no explanation, no emotion, just distance. Trevor was left confused, devastated, discarded. And Ninaki, she tried to mediate. She tried to reach Meghan. She tried to save 31 years of friendship from collapsing into nothing. But Meghan didn't respond. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She disappeared. The silence wasn't loud. It was absolute. And that silence carried a message louder than words ever could. Ninaki wasn't part of Meghan's life anymore. Not because of betrayal, not because of conflict, because she was no longer needed. And what came next would haunt Ninaki forever. Because right as Meghan erased her past, erased her marriage, erased her closest friend, she began moving in entirely different circles. Exclusive circles, powerful circles, dangerous circles, circles where names weren't spoken publicly, but everyone inside knew exactly who everyone was. Circles that would eventually lead her to royalty. And according to whispers that refused to die, those circles had already introduced her to power long before Prince Harry ever appeared. And the most disturbing question of all, was Harry walking into a love story or walking into a plan that had been unfolding for decades? Because by the time Prince Harry entered Meghan's life, Ninaki Priddy was already gone, erased so completely it was as if she had never existed at all. Not faded, not drifted, erased. And that's what disturbed her most. It wasn't just the ending of their friendship, it was how efficiently it ended. No confrontation, no messy emotional fallout, no dramatic final argument where truths explode and closure arrives in painful clarity. Just silence. Cold. Absolute. Surgical silence. 31 years of shared memories dissolved without a single explanation. And that's when whispers began to reach Ninaki from places she never expected. Places Meghan had begun frequenting. Places far removed from their childhood innocence. Private members clubs. Elite inner circles. Rooms where influence flowed like currency and proximity to power determined your value. The name that surfaced repeatedly was Soho House. Not just a club, a gateway. A discreet sanctuary for celebrities, executives, media elites, and royalty-adjacent figures. A place deliberately designed to protect secrets. No exterior signage, no cameras allowed, no public accountability. Inside Soho House, status wasn't announced. It was understood. And according to insiders, Meghan wasn't just passing through. She was embedded. She was known. She was welcome. She belonged. This wasn't the shy girl Ninaki grew up with. This was someone navigating power corridors with calculated precision. Someone who understood proximity was leverage. Someone who understood relationships were currency. And most unsettling of all, someone who appeared entirely comfortable in that environment. Because Soho House wasn't just where celebrities relaxed, it was where connections were manufactured, where alliances formed quietly, where introductions happened away from public scrutiny, where futures were negotiated behind closed doors. And in those same corridors, corridors, another name quietly existed: Prince Andrew, a royal whose reputation would later become one of the monarchy's greatest disasters, a prince whose associations would spark global outrage, a prince whose presence inside elite private circles was not uncommon. And according to long-standing whispers circulating within those exclusive environments, Meghan had already been moving through the same ecosystem, not necessarily together, not necessarily directly connected, but present, nearby, operating inside the same invisible web of influence. And for Ninaki, hearing those whispers felt like watching a ghost story unfold in real time, because the girl she once knew was now completely inaccessible, not physically, emotionally, psychologically, historically. It was as if Meghan had sealed off her former life and stepped fully into a new identity, an upgraded version, a more strategic version, a version who understood visibility, perception, and power with chilling clarity. And then came the moment that would permanently change everything. Prince Harry. The introduction wasn't loud, it wasn't chaotic, it was quiet, intentional, precise. And from the outside, it looked like fate. But from Ninaki's perspective, something felt different, not wrong, calculated. Because Ninaki remembered something Meghan once said long before Harry existed in her world. She's been planning this all her life. Those words weren't screamed in anger, they were whispered in disbelief. Because when Ninaki looked back at the timeline, the patterns aligned too perfectly to ignore. The emotional detachment from her father, the sudden abandonment of Trevor, the systematic disappearance of childhood friendships, the seamless transition into elite private circles, the proximity to power long before Harry arrived. It didn't feel random. It felt progressive, layered, intentional. And the most haunting part, Ninaki wasn't there to witness Meghan meet Harry. She wasn't there to observe the emotional authenticity of that connection, because by then, she had already been removed from Meghan's life entirely, which meant she had no way of knowing whether Harry met the real Meghan or the version constructed for him, because that's the terrifying thing about transformation. The people who knew you before can't recognize you after, and the people who meet you after never knew who you were before. Harry met Meghan at the peak of her reinvention, the peak of her ascension, the peak of her strategic positioning within a world Ninaki had never belonged to. And Harry fell fast, faster than anyone expected, faster than protocol usually allowed, faster than history had ever recorded. And that speed alone raised quiet concerns within palace walls, not public concerns, private ones, because royal institutions operate on caution, on verification, on scrutiny. But Harry wasn't cautious. He was emotional, driven by connection, driven by empathy, driven by his lifelong search for someone who understood him. And Meghan became that person. She mirrored his pain, his frustration, his desire to escape institutional constraints. She offered him emotional safety, validation, freedom, everything he had been searching for. And Harry trusted her completely, blindly, fully. And that's when Ninaki realized something she couldn't undo. She had no way to warn him, no way to reach him, no way to explain the version of Meghan she remembered. Because from Harry's perspective, Meghan had no past, only a present, only a future, only the narrative he experienced firsthand. And that's what made Ninaki's warning so tragic, because it arrived too late. Not because she didn't try, because she had already been erased. Her voice carried no weight. Her presence held no influence. She had become part of Meghan's deleted history, and the world embraced Meghan's new identity without question. The humanitarian, the Duchess, the symbol of modern royalty. But Ninaki remained haunted by a question that refused to leave her. Not whether Meghan changed, but whether Meghan had always been this person and simply waited for the right moment to reveal herself. Because transformation isn't always evolution. Sometimes it's exposure. Sometimes power doesn't corrupt. Sometimes it unmasks. And Ninaki was left with nothing but memories of a girl who once shared her childhood and the painful realization that the girl she loved no longer existed. Or maybe never did. Because when someone can erase 31 years of friendship without hesitation, without explanation, without remorse, you're forced to confront the possibility that the person you trusted most was never who you believed they were. And somewhere inside royal palaces, behind security gates and carefully guarded public appearances, the version of Meghan the world sees today continues forward, while the version Ninaki knew remains frozen in time. A ghost. A question. And perhaps the greatest secret Meghan Markle never wanted anyone to hear.